All right, let's go to Gary Delabate. I turn it over to you. What are you singing, Gary?
Fly Like an Eagle.
Fly Like an Eagle, the Steve Miller Band. Go ahead.
Oh, Lord, through the revolution, feed the babies.
Oh, yeah.
Steve Miller Band's final #1 hit of their career was almost never released. The group's frontman had been agonizing over the song for years and years and couldn't finish it. It wasn't until he crossed paths with another legendary musician that the song went from an unfinished state to a #1 hit. This track represented a way for Steve Miller to stay relevant amidst a changing musical landscape. It also resulted in some of his longtime fans loathing the track, in addition to his record label, and one TV show went as far as goofing on the track. 4 decades after its release though, the song played a pivotal role in almost topping the Hot 100 chart once again. Today, let's talk about the song and the surprising impact it had on Steve Miller's career. Born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1943, Steve Miller from a young age was surrounded by music. His father was a pathologist, but also an amateur recording engineer, which exposed his son to various musicians, including Les Paul, who became Miller's godfather. In fact, Les Paul gave a young Miller guitar lessons, teaching him his first 3 chords. Les Paul and his wife even got married at Miller's childhood home. Miller's family soon moved to Texas, where he befriended and played with the young Boss Skaggs in his first band in the late 50s. They covered Chuck Berry tunes, and in a funny twist of fate, Miller later went on to back up Chuck Berry. It proved to be insightful and at the same time stressful, as Berry would show up minutes before gigs. He demanded he be paid in cash and wanted extra cash if they did an encore. Miller remarked to Classic Rock magazine, when the Miller Band backed him at Bill Graham's request, first thing he said at rehearsals was, "Okay, no one take a shave or shower until we've played." Just before the gig, he disappeared and returned loaded as a zombie on downers. We backed him all over California for 2 years and he got more and more annoying. He went on to add that during a gig at the Carousel Ballroom, Berry called out the Steve Miller Band on stage. Miller added, "Afterwards he came back to my dressing room and I told him, hey, you Chuck, get your own band, get your own amp and get the out of my dressing room." He was fine from then on. A lot of blues guys are real cranky. Steve Miller Band released a series of records in the late 60s, but it was the 70s where the group achieved their first commercial success, as Miller began writing more straightforward rock tunes, ditching their earlier sound. This started with 1973's The Joker, whose title track gave the group their first #1 hit in America and the UK. The album also went platinum.
I'm a picker, I'm a grinner, I'm a lover, and I'm a sinner.
The album also gave the group their first platinum record. They followed it up with their 4 times platinum album, 1976's Fly Like an Eagle, which produced a slew of hits, including the title track, Take the Money and Run, and the #1 hit, Rockin' Me.
Fly like an eagle, let my spirit carry me, I want you. So keep on rocking me, baby. Keep on rocking me, baby.
The group closed out the 70s with another blockbuster record in Book of Dreams, which gave the group a top 10 hit with the song Jet Airliner, and top 25 hits with the tunes Jungle Love and Swingtown. They spent 2 to 3 years on the road promoting Book of Dreams, and by the time they got off the road, attention was now turning to their follow-up record. But the industry was changing. New wave and synth-pop sounds were suddenly popular, and like so many bands who dominated the 70s, the Steve Miller Band needed to stay relevant. Couple this with a new TV channel called MTV, which launched in 1981, and suddenly there was a new medium for musicians and labels to think about when promoting their songs and records. 4 years passed until the Steve Miller Band returned in 1981 with their follow-up Circle of Love. Miller addressed the space between the albums, telling the Associated Press that the reason there was such a long gap between records is because he was busy doing a lot of different things, including, of course, touring on his last record. He also said he composed all the music, he wrote all the lyrics, and he produced the recording sessions. On top of that, he claimed he never really took any time off, and immediately when the promotion cycle for their past record was over, he started writing the songs for Circle of Love. At the same time, Miller admitted that the changing musical landscape of disco, new wave, and punk all played a role in his songwriting going forward. While the album contained familiar sounding tunes, there were also some surprises like the funk-inspired 18-minute plus song Macho City.
All around the world,
The message is hot and smoking.
While Circle of Love went gold, it failed to match the commercial success of the band's last 3 records. Attention then turned to the group's follow-up record, 1982's Abracadabra. Steve Miller had been working on the title track for years, but couldn't land on the right lyrics. I mean, finding something to rhyme with abracadabra isn't that easy. Miller admitted the song was originally written on acoustic guitar with what he referred to as, and I quote, atrocious lyrics. The musician admitted to American Songwriter, "It started as an instrumental, gypsy blues kind of tune. I wrote this really bad set of lyrics and recorded it. For several more years, I thought about it and I just couldn't get the bad lyrics out of my head." Miller admitted to Off the Record that he initially recorded the song with those atrocious lyrics and was ready to release it on an earlier album, but then he remembered something that Paul McCartney once told him. The former Beatle remarked how he'd wished he'd spent a little more time on some of the songs he wrote. That stuck with Miller, who opted not to release the song in its original state. It wasn't until Miller took a vacation, going on a skiing trip to Sun Valley, Idaho, that he finally found the inspiration to properly finish the song. He was skiing down a hill one day and saw a big cloud of snow. A fellow skier had fallen and he went to go check on them, and it turned out it was Diana Ross. Ross and Miller had actually went back 15 years prior to 1966 when Miller shared the stage with Ross and the Supremes on the TV show Hullabaloo. Miller started to think about how the Supremes would interpret the song, adding, "I was thinking about Diana when I went home for lunch, and I just thought about what the Supremes would do with the song." Enjoying a BLT sandwich, which sounds good right about now, he wrote the lyrics to Abracadabra in 15 minutes. Miller even added to Off the Record jokingly that the song took him 3 years and 15 minutes to complete. Miller went on to add, "I just sat down and I could see them saying, 'I want to reach out and grab you.'" Compared to the Steve Miller Band's earlier work, Abracadabra was much more pop influenced, utilizing a danceable rhythm, something Miller even referred to as a pogo dance. Abracadabra was recorded in 1981 at Capitol Studios in Hollywood, California for the Steve Miller Band's 12th studio album of the same name. The album was released on June 15th, 1982 through Capitol Records. Miller remarked his frustration with his record label and the industry in general at the time, telling Rolling Stone, "What's expected of me is short tunes. They just want that 4-minute fix." Unlike most of the band's previous efforts, most of the record was not composed by Miller, but drummer Gary Malaber, who brought in a handful of demos from another band he was in called Tracker, which also featured Steve Miller Band members John Massaro, Byron Allred, along with ex-members Lonnie Turner and Greg Douglas. Miller ultimately opted to use all of the demos, and Malaber even got 8 co-writing credits on the record. The lyrics "round and round it goes, where it stops nobody knows" are a reference to the spinning wheel segment from the original Amateur Hour.
Round and round it goes, where it stops, nobody knows.
Around she goes, and where she stops, nobody knows.
Capitol Records released Abracadabra in the States as a single, but it got no traction on rock radio. Despite this, Miller was set to do a 35-city arena tour around the country. But the chairman of his label told Miller that the company could only offer his band a measly $1,600 in touring support. They also told Miller that he was a dinosaur act and that his career was done. Miller, who was obviously upset considering he had made the company millions of dollars, canceled his American tour and opted to go to Europe and play some shows instead. Miller soon toured the continent, and during his trek, the title track went #1 all over the world with the exception of America and Japan. It turned out that those 2 markets were controlled by Capitol Records, while Phonogram owned the rights to his music in the rest of the world. Capitol soon took note of the single's performance and continued to support it stateside. Miller remarked, "When I got back to the States, it was #1 here too. It turned out to be my biggest hit." The song spent 2 non-consecutive weeks at the top spot in America on the Hot 100 chart. The song went to #1 in 9 countries. Miller remarked off the record that prior to Abracadabra, he could feel radio programmers turning against his band, and the success of the single temporarily changed his fortunes, with him remarking that it felt like he kicked those programmers in the butt. In a strange twist of fate, when Miller's past hit Rockin' Me hit the #1 spot, it unseated Chicago's tune If You Leave Me Now. Years later, Chicago returned the favor, unseating Abracadabra by taking the #1 spot with their tune Hard to Say I'm Sorry.
It's hard for me to say I'm sorry.
Despite this, Abracadabra spent 14 weeks in the top 10 spot in the States, an impressive feat. The song became Steve Miller Band's last #1 hit and top 10 hit of his career for over 4 decades. The album, for its part, was also Miller's last platinum-selling record, peaking at #3, and it featured songs like Cool Magic and Give It Up, which peaked at #57 and 60 on the Hot 100 chart. The song got heavy play on MTV, introducing Steve Miller Band to a younger generation of fans. Steve Miller was on tour during the shooting of the video, so the video consists of images of him, along with magicians in a white room performing tricks and other illusions with a female assistant. The clip was directed by Peter Kahn, who was one of the first to integrate computer effects into videos. While Abracadabra was another commercial success for the group, critics were mixed on the song. While some praised its catchiness, others felt it was too much of a departure from the group's trademark sound. This included many longtime fans of the group who felt the band sold out to stay relevant. Despite the criticism, though, Abracadabra remains one of Steve Miller Band's most recognizable and enduring hits. It wasn't just Steve Miller fans who were split over the song, as even some of the people at MTV shared the same feelings. Dave Holmes, a comic and a writer who was also a VJ on MTV, remarked in the book I Want My MTV, "I loved how acts who were huge before MTV tried to adapt and couldn't. Like Abracadabra by Steve Miller, which was a huge song. Oh, stop it. You're making a fool of yourself. He just seemed too old. He probably was in his late 30s. Even Saturday Night Live took aim at the song when they did a skit in the late 90s called Songs That Ruined Everything."
You can hear that and other career-destroying hits on an amazing collection called Songs That Ruined Everything. You'll get dozens of songs which signaled the beginning of the end for many formerly cool artists, including Abracadabra by the Steve Miller Band.
Despite Abracadabra's success, it did little to invigorate audiences' appetite for the Steve Miller Band's live shows. Miller struggled to fill arenas, playing to a few thousand people, telling the word. We were considered a dinosaur group. Punk was in, new wave, the hair bands, the guys in the green tights and 2-foot hairdos. It seemed at the time that our run was over. I also want to point out something that's not widely discussed, is that in 1982, the record industry was hitting a bit of a slump. The Associated Press reported that while gold and platinum singles had increased from 1981 to 1982, that trend wasn't the case for LPs. This made the Steve Miller Band's performance of Abracadabra even more impressive. Miller ended up taking 6 years off from touring despite releasing albums during the rest of the decade. He hit the road again in 1988, remarking to Louder Sound that he lost interest in recording and radio marketing, stating, "I was fed up with the hustle." In 1983, Abracadabra was the #1 song in the world, and then overnight, everything changed. "I was like a dinosaur. Go away, we're sick of you. I'd had a magnificent run, so I thought my career was over. I bought a farm and spent 3 years doing nothing but that, until I woke up one morning and I was so bored. What the f am I doing? I'm a musician, not a dairy farmer," he told himself. By the late 80s and early 90s, Steve Miller became a sort of elder statesman of rock thanks to classic rock radio, which revitalized his old catalog. He soon was filling arenas and consistently toured in the States, adding, "I realized in 1989 I'd been on the top of the midline charts for 206 weeks and didn't even know it. I toured with the Beach Boys and Pink Floyd, and David Gilmour encouraged me to return. I got inspired to play live. By 1990, my hits record was selling 1.5 million, and I toured on that for 10 years, and then I got tired again." Abracadabra has left a lasting impact on popular culture. It's been featured in numerous films and TV shows, including American Dad, Sing 2, and the incredible Burt Wonderstone. Sugar Ray famously covered the song on their record in 1999 titled 1459, which peaked at number 43 on the pop airplay charts in America. The song's catchy chorus and memorable lyrics have made it a staple of 1980s music compilations and radio playlists. Then this year, in a surprising turn of events, Abracadabra found a new life when it was sampled by rapper Eminem as the backing track for his new song Houdini. This unexpected collaboration brought the Steve Miller Band's classic hit to a whole new generation of listeners. This year, it peaked at number 2 on the Hot 100 chart, while it topped the hip-hop charts. You're probably wondering, what's Steve Miller's reaction been to Eminem sampling his song? Well, of course, he had to give permission for Eminem to use the track, but he took to Instagram to let his feelings be known, which were really positive. He praised Eminem as a timeless originator and expressed his honor of being included in Eminem's creative process, adding, "There aren't many artists who take the time or make the effort to stand up for themselves and credit and respect their influences at the same time. Marshall Mathers, you're an exception and on my short list of people who respect the art." If you're a fan of the Steve Miller Band, you might find this interesting. Rolling Stone published an article about how much the Steve Miller Band has been sampled by rap and hip-hop artists, highlighting some of the more popular songs. In a funny twist though, the Steve Miller Band was one of the first rock bands to incorporate samples into their own sounds. Back in the late 80s, as sampling was becoming more popular among hip-hop artists, it wasn't uncommon for artists to use samples without permission. That was the case when Steve Miller's song The Joker was sampled by Houston rap group Ghetto Boys for their song Gangster of Love. While Miller's lyrics were lighthearted, the Ghetto Boys' lyrics were far more sexually suggestive.
The game. I'll turn your sister out if she with me. You wanna know my identity?
When Rick Rubin re-released the Ghetto Boys' album, the music industry and lawyers started to take sampling far more seriously. So the Ghetto Boys couldn't get clearance from Steve Miller to use the Joker in their song. They instead had to replace it with Leonard Skinner's Sweet Home Alabama.
I'll turn your sister out if she with me. You wanna know my identity?
That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. As always, if you have suggestions, let me know in the comment section below, and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.